20 days after I married Brad Thompson. His mother handed me a lease for the apartment we were sleeping in. She did it at 9 in the morning, wearing cream silk, and the kind of calm expression that made it take me a second to understand what I was looking at. Not a joke, not a misunderstanding, a document. Nothing dramatic. Catherine said, sliding the papers across the glass coffee table, just a formal arrangement. For the trust, I looked down, residential lease agreement. Monthly rent due. Occupants, Brad Thompson. And spouse? Spouse? That was me now. Apparently, not Emma. Not the woman who had married her son. Less than 3 weeks earlier, just spouse. The apartment was beautiful. Lake views. Marble floors. Old family furniture. Polished into submission. Nothing ugly. Nothing accidental. Nothing mine. Brad stood near the kitchen island, with a coffee mug in his hand. Too quiet to be innocent. I looked from the paper to him. What is this? He shifted. It's just paperwork. M. Catherine smiled. All efficiency. The apartment is a family asset. Gregory advised us it would be cleaner if there were a nominal rental agreement in place. Tax treatment. Liability. Estate continuity. Boring things. Boring things. That was how rich people described control when they wanted you to swallow it politely. I set the papers back down. You want me to pay rent? To live with my husband? Not you personally. Catherine said, you two. As a household. Brad finally spoke. It's not a big deal. Mom's trying to keep everything formal. Formal. We had just hosted a 300-person wedding under white flowers and string music. The Chicago papers had run photos. Catherine had kissed me for cameras. Her husband had shaken my hand like I was joining a board. And 20 days later, they were charging admission. How much? I asked. Market value would be much higher. Catherine said, we thought $1,500 was fair as a starting point. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was obscene. I looked at Brad. You knew about this. His jaw tightened. I knew she wanted to talk. Through the trust structure. That is not the same answer. Catherine folded her hands. Emma, nobody is attacking you. But you came into a family with substantial assets. Boundaries matter. There it was. Not marriage, not welcome. Boundaries. Something inside me went very still. I had spent 10 years building a career in rooms full of men who smiled while trying to box me in. I knew what power sounded like when it wanted to sound practical. So I smiled back. Well, I said, that solves it. Neither of them spoke. If this place needs to stay a formal Thompson asset, then I'll move back into my apartment. Silence. Brad stared at me. Your what? My apartment. I said lightly. In Lincoln Park, Catherine's expression flickered. A missed fact. A gap in the file. Good. I stood and reached for my bag. Brad kept staring. You still have that place? Of course I still have it. He said nothing. That told me more than anything else could have. Because this wasn't the face of a man hearing new information. This was the face of a man realizing he had made an assumption and built a strategy on top of it. Catherine recovered first. That little apartment? I assumed you sold it. After the wedding? No. You never mentioned keeping it. I slipped my phone into my bag. You never asked. Brad set his mug down too hard. Coffee jumped over the rim and spotted the marble. I walked to the entryway, then turned back. I'm already late for work. I said, so here's where we are. I'm not signing a lease to live in my own marriage. If this apartment belongs to the family more than it belongs to the people sleeping in it, that's useful information. I'll think about what to do with it. Emma, Brad said, sharper now. But I was done. Catherine rose at last. Smooth and unhurried. Darling, there's no reason to be emotional. I opened the door. No, there's every reason to be clear. Then I stepped into the hallway, pulled the door shut behind me, and stood there for one long second with my hand still on the brass handle. My heart was pounding hard enough to blur my vision. Behind me was the apartment everyone kept calling my home. Ahead of me was the first honest thought I'd had since the wedding. I had not married into a family. I had been absorbed into a structure. And if they were bold enough to hand me a lease on day 20, then whatever came next was going to be worse. By the time I got to my office, I had replayed the conversation 6 different ways, and in every version, the worst part wasn't Catherine. It was Brad. Not because he raised his voice, not because he defended her particularly hard, because he stood there and behaved like the whole thing was administratively unfortunate. At 11:12, he texted, "Can we not make this bigger than it is?" I stared at the message. No. Are you okay? No, that was out of line. Just scale management. I typed back, "You mean bigger than your mother charging me rent to live with you?" He answered, "That's not what this is." Then what is it? A family asset issue, not a relationship issue. I looked down at my ring. That sentence rearranged something in my head, because if he could set asset over here and relationship over there so casually, then he either didn't understand what had happened that morning, or he understood it perfectly and needed me not to. At noon, he texted my sister, "Lunch? Need your face." Mia responded right away. "Erel, 12:30. If he's dead already, order without me." Mia was 2 years older than me. A litigator. And the only person I knew who could make a silk blouse look confrontational. The second I sat down, she said, "You look like someone smiled at you while setting your car on fire." That made me laugh, which was enough to tell her it was serious. I told her everything: the lease, the trust, Catherine's tone, Brad's non-answer, the $1,500 presented like a courtesy discount on my own humiliation. When I finished, Mia leaned back. "Okay," she said. "That is not a rich family quirk. I know. That is a systems move." I looked at her. Meaning? Meaning they are trying to establish terms early. Financial terms. Psychological terms. Probably relational terms, too. They want the hierarchy set Before you get fully comfortable, I picked up my water glass and set it back down. You make it sound like I joined a private government, didn't you? I said nothing. She leaned forward. Emma, I need you to think carefully before you defend Brad here. I'm not defending him. You want to? I hated that she was right, because there was still a part of me, an embarrassingly loyal, newly married, still in love part, that wanted this to be pressure. Family habits, class weirdness. Not intent. I don't know what I'm defending. I said finally, I just don't know if he's inside this with her. Or if he's been trained not to see it. Those are not the same thing. Mia said, but they can end in the same place. I took a breath. There's more. Of course there is. The way she said family asset, the way he said formal, it sounded rehearsed. Mia's face sharpened. Did you sign a prenup? I hesitated. Oh my God, she said. It was right before the wedding. Did you have your own lawyer? Sort of. Emma. I had someone look at it. An actual family law attorney? No. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Get me a copy. I don't even know where it is. Find it. It's probably standard. I said, and immediately hated how weak it sounded. Mia stared at me. Men with family trusts do not use the word standard unless they are trying to keep a woman calm. The truth was, I barely remembered signing it. The final 2 days before the wedding had been chaos. Vendors, seating charts, last-minute disasters. Brad had apologized. Gregory, the family attorney, had called it routine, protective, clean. I had signed because refusing felt symbolic, not necessary. Now, I was no longer sure which part of that sentence was the bigger mistake. Mia pointed at me. Listen carefully. I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you to get literate fast. That landed because panic was useless. Literacy was leverage. Okay. I said, good. Start collecting documents. Prenup, bank stuff, property info, anything with your signature on it. And stop assuming that because something feels personal, it isn't also strategic. Back at work, I managed exactly one real task. Before flowers arrived, white roses, there was a note in Brad's handwriting. I'm sorry this morning felt ugly. Dinner tonight, just us. Let me fix it. Love you. Owns? That note would have melted me. Now it irritated me on contact, not because the apology was fake. That would have been simpler. What bothered me was that it was emotionally correct and structurally empty. He was apologizing for how it felt, not for what he'd allowed. That evening, I got home to find him cooking in a gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first month's rent. After college, hey, he said. Hey. He kissed my cheek for one dangerous second. The whole awful day wobbled. I made ossobuco, he said. Peace offering. That's either very sweet or very tactical. He gave me half a smile. Can it be both? We ate at one end of a 12-seat table. Candles lit, music low. The whole scene arranged. with enough care to almost work on me. Almost halfway through dinner, he said, "So, the apartment?" I set my fork down. "Which one? A Pause? The one in Lincoln Park?" You never told me you were keeping it." I held his gaze. "I told you I owned it. You told me you bought it years ago." "Yes. I assumed once we got married that I would liquidate the only property I've ever owned." His jaw tightened. "That we would talk about it. This morning would have been a fascinating time to bring that up." He exhaled through his nose. "Mom handled that badly." That was the first clear thing he had said all day. I waited. "She gets fixated on structure," he said, "especially when she feels uncertainty." I almost laughed. "I'm sorry, is the uncertainty me?" "No. The transition." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "my family does things in systems. Assets, liabilities, trust vehicles, household staffing, public obligation. It's not personal." There it was again. That phrase, the lie people tell when something is most personal. I leaned back. "You keep saying that, like it helps." "I'm trying to explain the context." "No. You're trying to de-weaponize the language." He looked up sharply. I went on, "If your mother had said, 'I don't see you as family yet, and I want a mechanism to remind you this apartment belongs to us,' at least that would have been honest. That's not fair. Neither is rent." He rubbed one hand over his mouth for the first time that night. He looked tired instead of polished. "You have to understand how exposed my family is," he said. "Exposed to what?" He hesitated. There it was again. "Not confusion. Calculation. We're in a sensitive period," he said finally. "The business. Some legal noise. Nothing I can really discuss." "Legal noise? Emma?" "No. Say the actual words. Don't hand me PR language in my own dining room." His expression tightened. "This is exactly what I mean. You always make things adversarial when they don't need to be." I stared at him. Now the problem was my interpretation. After a few seconds, he reached for my hand. I let him take it, mostly because I wanted to know what came next. "I love you," he said. "I married you because I love you. Not because of my mother, not because of the board, not because of appearances." "Board." I caught it immediately. He noticed that I noticed. "Bored?" I said. He shook his head once. "Forget that." "I don't think I will." He let go of my hand. Then, softer now, "I just need you to trust that there are pressures on my side you don't fully see yet." That was probably meant to make me feel closer to him. Instead, it did the opposite. Because if he knew I didn't fully see them, and he was still asking me for trust, then he was asking me to participate blind before bed. I dug through the study, looking for the prenup. No luck. When I came back into the bedroom, Brad was loosening his cufflinks. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Nothing." He watched me for a beat too long. "You sure?" "Yes." That night, he fell asleep quickly. I didn't. Just after midnight, A text came in from Mia. Find the prenup. Don't ask for it. Find it. I stared at the screen, then turned my head and looked at my husband. He looked harmless in sleep. That was the problem. Because somewhere in that apartment, there was a contract with my name on it. And I was beginning to suspect that whatever I had signed before the wedding was only the first document. I hadn't fully understood. I found the prenup the next afternoon in a banker's box in the back of the study closet, tucked behind old tax binders and charity photo albums. It was in a navy folder, embossed with the Thompson family crest. Of course it was. Buried. Not shared. Not casual. I should have sent it to Mia unopened. Instead, I sat on the rug in the study and started reading. The first pages were what rich people mean when they say standard. Separate property stayed separate. Family trust assets were untouchable. No claim to premarital business holdings. No expectation of inheritance. Fine. Cold, but fine. Then the wording shifted. Conduct detrimental to the family's social, reputational, or professional standing. Another clause, annual financial disclosure to ensure transparency in matters affecting family continuity. Another, in the event of future disputes regarding children, educational environment, public exposure, residence, medical care, and inherited obligations. Matters shall be resolved through private arbitration. Private arbitration. Not court, not mutual agreement. Private. Then came the section on family representation, public events, alignment with long-term family interests. It didn't read like protection. It read like incorporation. My phone buzzed. Brad. Dinner with my parents tonight. 7:00. Gibson's Wear the Blue Dress. I stared at the message. Not, would you mind? Not, can we go? Wear the blue dress. The blue dress was one Catherine had picked out months earlier, after gently informing me that jewel tones photographed more confidently than neutrals. I texted back, can't tonight, late at work. He answered immediately, this isn't optional. Please don't make tonight harder. There it was again. Never quite a direct order, always the implication that resistance itself was the problem. I scanned the prenup at work and sent it to Mia under the subject line, tell me if I should panic. She replied 6 minutes later, I'm leaving court. Don't do anything until I read this. And do not get pregnant. I am no longer joking. That line should have startled me more than it did, because by then, the idea had already started stalking the edges of my mind, not because Brad and I had sat down and planned a baby. We hadn't, but since the wedding, he had become casually, repeatedly, strangely specific about the future. How many bedrooms a real family home should have, how lucky we were that the apartment could carry us through the first year or two, how his mother knew the best obstetricians in the city, how it would be nice for everyone if there were happy news soon, given how tense things were around the business. At the time, I had filed all of it, under rich family pressure. Now I was reorganizing the cabinet. That night, at Gibson's, Catherine was in pale gray silk. Bradley Sr. looked tired and expensive, and Brad sat beside me with one hand warm against my back, as if we were a united front. Instead of an active misunderstanding, Catherine waited until the salads arrived. "I understand," she said, "that you've been asking questions about the legal documents." My eyes flicked to Brad. He had told her. He gave me a tiny look, almost apologetic, almost warning, and reached for his water. "I've been reading what I signed," I said. "A healthy habit," Catherine replied, "though perhaps a little late." Bradley Sr. cleared his throat. "Gregory wrote that agreement to prevent ambiguity." "Ambiguity for whom?" I asked. Catherine dabbed the corner of her mouth. "Families like ours survive because things are clear. Expectations, duties, exposure. Families like ours." It was amazing how often she said that phrase when what she meant was not yours. I kept my voice even. "I'm not clear on why marriage to your son required clauses about family representation and private arbitration over future children." Brad shifted beside me. No," I said, still looking at Catherine. "I'd actually love to hear this one." Her smile could have frosted glass. "Because ordinary conflict becomes public spectacle. When there is enough money involved, that sounds like fear, not marriage. That," she said softly, "is because you were not raised to distinguish between the two." "Mom," Brad said quietly, but he didn't sound shocked, just uncomfortable. Catherine changed direction, so smoothly. It made my skin crawl. "Fine," she said. "Let's talk practically. Bradley tells me you're still working ridiculous hours." "I work full-time." "You overwork," she corrected. That may have been charming before the wedding. Now it's destabilizing. To whom? To the household. There it was. The household. Brad stepped in. "Mom just means you've been exhausted." "I've been employed." "Emma," he said, using my full name. "Now, you know this campaign cycle won't last forever. Maybe after Henderson, you can ease up." I turned to him. "Ease up? You don't have to keep proving yourself." That sentence would have sounded loving to almost anyone overhearing us. To May, it sounded like a warning, wrapped in concern. The rest of dinner passed in that polished silence, wealthy family's mistake for resolution. Outside the restaurant, Catherine held me back, while Brad spoke to his father near the curb. Her grip on my elbow was elegant and immovable. "You are making this harder than it has to be," she said. "I'm beginning to understand that's the line women hear. Right before they lose something, her mouth moved in something that wasn't a smile. No, it's the line women hear right before they are offered an easier version of their lives." I pulled my arm free. "I'm not looking for easier." "That," she said, "may be your most middle-class instinct." Back at the apartment, I called Mia from the guest bathroom with the shower running. "Well," she said, the second she picked up. "You were right. I know. Read me the worst clause." I did. There was a beat of silence. Then she said, very clearly, that is one of the most aggressive marital control agreements I've seen outside of a custody war. The bathroom felt smaller. What does that actually mean? It means they built discretion into every place. They might someday want power, reputation, conduct, children, money, medical decisions. It's not airtight, but it's designed to intimidate. My stomach turned. Can they enforce it? Some of it? Enough of it. Especially if they can outspend you and keep things private? I shut my eyes. Mia. What? I think they're trying to get me to stop working. They are. No. I mean, actively. I know. I leaned against the sink. And I think there's more. Of course there is. Brad keeps talking about exposure and the board and legal noise around the company. Mia's voice sharpened. Find out what the company is dealing with. How? Use the internet, like a woman with a mortgage. Despite everything, I laughed. Then I heard the bedroom door open. I have to go. Emma. Her tone dropped. Listen to me until you know exactly what game they're playing. Do not tell them what you know. Read. Save. Document. Smile if you have to. But stop walking into rooms emotionally and calling it honesty. I hung up just as Brad knocked. You okay? Yeah. You've been in there a while. I opened the door. He was in a white t-shirt and pajama pants, hair damp from the shower. Looking so normal, it made me angry. Just talking to Mia. His mouth tightened, almost invisibly. About us? About my sister's life? Brad. She has one. He kissed my forehead, like a ceasefire, and said, come to bed. 3 days later, I found the first camera, not because I was looking for one, because once the idea entered my mind, I couldn't stop noticing things. A motion sensor in the hallway that didn't match the rest of the hardware. A digital clock in the living room, angled too perfectly toward the seating area. A smoke detector in the study with a tiny green pulse. Then Friday afternoon, I came home early with a headache and noticed something I should have seen sooner. The bookshelf speaker nearest the bar was unplugged and still on. A tiny blue light knuckled. I walked over slowly, knelt, and touched the side panel. Warm. Not dead, not decorative. Active. I didn't rip it apart. I took pictures instead. Then I opened Bluetooth settings on my phone. One device appeared immediately, TH-INT-LR3. Thompson Interior Living Room 3. I stared at the name until my skin went cold. Not consumer hardware. System labeling. I moved through the apartment without appearing to search study, hallway, kitchen, bedroom. By the time I was done, I had found 5 devices that made no sense. Unless you assumed the apartment was not just secured, it was monitored. I was still standing in the kitchen, trying to slow my breathing, when the door opened and Brad walked in early. He stopped when he saw me. Hey, I thought you'd still be at work. I came home with a headache. He set down his keys. You look pale. I looked at him, really looked. Then I said, "How many cameras are in this apartment?" Everything in his face went still. Then, very softly, "Emma?" That was answer enough. I laughed. Araf? Disbelieving sound. "It's not what you think," he said. "That should be embroidered on your family crest." He ran a hand through his hair. "There are interior security devices." Yes. Temporary. Because of the situation with the company. What situation? I can't fully discuss it. Then I can fully discuss this. I held up my phone with the picture of the speaker, TH-INT-LR3. "You labeled my marriage like a floor plan." His voice dropped. "Keep your voice down." I stepped closer. "Or what? Someone might hear?" He flinched. Good. That meant shame still existed somewhere in him. "They're not there to spy on you," he said. "They're there to protect the residents." The residents? He shut his eyes for 1 second. "Emma, please." "No. No more, please." "Who authorized them?" His silence lasted too long. "My mother pushed for them. After the wedding." After the wedding. So while I was unpacking shoes and deciding where to put my books, someone was mounting lenses in smoke detectors. Did you know? Yes. The honesty hit harder than another lie would have. And you let it happen. It was supposed to be temporary. Like the rent? That's not fair. Bread. Fairness left this apartment. Before I moved in, he moved toward me, hands open, voice gentler. Now, reaching for the tone that had gotten him so far with me. There are active threats right now. Press. Litigation. People looking for angles. My family's name draws attention. You don't understand yet. I felt suddenly, vividly tired. Because every explanation he offered moved in the same direction. Not toward truth, toward inevitability. Everything was always already necessary. The prenup, the lease, the cameras, mid-job, my tone, necessary. I stepped around him and grabbed my bag from the counter. "Where are you going?" "To the doctor." His head snapped up. "What?" The lie came to me fully formed. "I'm late." For 1 second, I thought he might stop breathing. "Late?" he repeated. "Yes." His eyes dropped. Involuntarily. To my stomach, then back to my face. Hope, fear, calculation. All of it crossed his expression in seconds. I saw all three, and once you see calculation, in a moment that intimate, you never really unsee it. "Are you pregnant?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." That part, at least, it was true. He sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Sooner than what? 2 seconds ago?" "That's not what I mean." I stared at him. "No, I know." He looked up at me. "If you are, we need to think carefully." We, not "Are you okay?" Not "What do you need?" We need to think carefully. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say. I left before he could answer. I bought 3 tests at a pharmacy, 8 blocks away. Used the restroom at my office because it was the only place that still felt partly mine, and found out at 6:14 p.m. that Mia had not been dramatic enough. Pregnant. 3 times, 3 pink lines, 3 confirmations. For a full minute, I sat on the closed toilet lid with the tests lined up on the counter beside me like evidence from a trial. I had not agreed to attend. Pregnant. My first coherent thought was not joy. It was inventory. What had they already seen? What had Brad already guessed? What did Catherine know? What did this change legally? What did this change structurally? Then, because I was still human, under all that fear, I put one hand over my mouth and cried. Not loudly, just enough to feel my life split again. Before this, after this, when I got home, Brad was waiting in the living room. He stood. As soon as I walked in, well, I kept my bag on my shoulder. Yes, he looked like I'd struck him. Then he crossed the room so fast, I almost stepped back, took my face in both hands, and kissed my forehead with something that felt so real. It nearly confused me all over again. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Emma." For one dangerous second, I saw the man I had married. Then he pulled back and said, voice shaking slightly, "We need to tell my mother carefully." And there it was, never gone. I removed his hands from my face. "We are not telling your mother tonight." He blinked. "What? I just found out." "She's going to know soon." "That sounds like her problem." He stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. "Emma, you don't understand. With everything going on right now, this changes the landscape." I laughed once, quietly. Jesus, Brad. Even now, what is that supposed to mean? It means I just told my husband I'm pregnant. And you answered me like a man updating a crisis memo. His face hardened. "That's unfair." "Maybe, but not inaccurate." He took a breath, visibly forcing himself back into calm. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm just..." And there's a lot happening. Then maybe try saying the simplest thing first. He looked at me, and for once seemed to understand, and there was only one correct line left. "I'm happy," he said softly. I'm scared. But I'm happy." I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed he was happy. I also believed that happiness in his world could coexist perfectly well with control. That night, I slept in the guest room and locked the door at 2:07 a.m. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Read the addendum attached to the prenup." Now, there had been an addendum. I hadn't even known there was an addendum. I opened the PDF she sent and read it in the blue light of my phone, one hand already resting, unconsciously over my stomach. Most of it dealt with future amendments, inheritance adjustments, and disclosure procedures in the event of children. Then I found the clause, "In the event of pregnancy, parties agree to consult mutually approved medical advisors regarding health management, scheduling considerations, public timing of announcements, and residence decisions in the best interest of the family, scheduling considerations, public timing, residence decisions. I stared at the words until they blurred. Below the paragraph was the line that made my blood go cold. Further postnuptial clarifications may be executed. As circumstances require, there was already a mechanism for the next document. My phone buzzed again. A second text from Mia. Emma, listen to me carefully. If they know, they will move fast. Do not sign anything. Do not switch doctors. Do not quit your job. And do not meet them alone. If Catherine starts being nice, I read that last line twice. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, outside the guest room, a pause at the door, Brad's voice low through the wood. Em? I didn't answer. Another pause, then quieter. I'm not my mother. I stared at the addendum on my screen and thought, no, but you were built in the same house. And somewhere between the lease, the cameras, the contract clauses, and the child now growing inside me, I had crossed into the part of the story where love was no longer the central question. Power was. Catherine started being nice 3 days after I told Brad. Not warmer, not softer, strategic nice. She called one morning while I was putting on mascara with one hand and trying not to throw up into a wastebasket with the other. Darling, she said, in that polished tone women use when they want credit for grace, before they've done anything graceful. I've been thinking we should spend some time together. Just us. Lunch. Not tension. The second pregnancy existed. Conflict had to be reframed. I was no longer a difficult new wife. I was a carrying vessel. With reputational value, I have work. I said, you work too much. So I've heard. A beat of silence. Then the honey came back. Emma, let's not do this the hard way. Your family? There are things you need to understand now. Now. Not before the wedding. Not before the prenup. Not before the cameras. Now. When my body had become relevant, she offered lunch at the Peninsula, private room. Somewhere calm. I said no twice. On the third try, she changed tactics and mentioned Dr. Philip Evans by name. He's delivered half the city, she said. Discreet. Exceptional. He knows our family well. Our family. I thanked her. Hung up and immediately texted Mia. She's assigning me an obstetrician. Mia called within 30 seconds. Absolutely not. Already there. Good. You need your own doctor. Your own records. Your own everything. I know. No. Emma, I need you to know, like a woman crossing a highway with traffic coming. That got my attention. Mia. Her voice dropped. More precise. Now, I did some digging on Thompson Enterprises. There's an environmental case pending in state court, old manufacturing site, groundwater contamination. It's bad. Bad enough that if it gets uglier in the press, the family image becomes part of the financial problem I sat down on the bed. So this is about publicity. It's about control. Publicity is just one reason. My stomach tightened. Wait. Brad said, legal noise. Men like Brad call everything legal noise until it starts costing them sleep. Then she added, there's more. I had Martin look at the post-nuptial language referenced in your addendum. There isn't a post-nup. There isn't one yet. I closed my eyes, but the framework is already there. If they decide pregnancy changes the risk profile, they can move quickly. Medical, residential, financial, image terms. They built the runway before takeoff. When I didn't answer, she said my name. Emma? What? You need to start asking a different question, which is not, do they love me? Not even, is Brad lying? The real question is, what does this family do? When reality threatens the narrative they prefer? That line stayed with me all day. By the time I got home, I had half an answer. They formalize, they contain, they rename, they monitor, they call pressure protection and obedience peace. The other half came from Sophia. Sophia Grant had been my best friend since Northwestern and was now an investigative reporter, which meant she had the useful combination of good instincts, no fear, and a deep hostility toward wealthy people who called crimes complications. They met at an intelligentsia near Randolph. I gave her the short version. The lease, the prenup, the cameras, the pregnancy, the push toward a family doctor, the lawsuit. When I finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. So this isn't a domestic problem. I looked at her. That's what Mia said. In lawyer language, this is me saying it. In reporter language, she leaned forward. This family doesn't sound emotional. It sounds procedural. That hit the same nerve. Mia had marriage. I was beginning to understand was simply the most intimate place procedure could happen. Sophia stirred her coffee. Did Brad ever mention his ex before you? Briefly. How brief? Museum curator. Serious relationship. Different future goals. Ended quietly. Sophia gave me a look. That's suspiciously well edited. Everything in my life is suspiciously well edited right now. That made her smile, but only for a second. I've heard the name before, she said. Chloe Bennett. The name meant nothing at first. Then it did. The Art Institute benefit, where Brad and I met, a passing reference months ago. A woman he had described in the clean, bloodless language people use when they need a relationship to sound concluded. What about her? Sophia studied me for a second, then said, there was a rumor a couple of years ago that she left the city fast. Job in Europe. No real explanation. Social accounts gone. At the time, I assumed breakup or family issue. Now I'm less sure. My hands tightened around my cup. You think it connects? I think rich families don't suddenly become controlling during your marriage. If they were healthy before it, that cracked something open in me. Because some part of me still wanted to believe I was the trigger. Mid-job. My apartment, My background, my resistance. Sophia's point was worse. But Tor, healthy systems don't invent this much control. From scratch, they repeat. That night, back at the apartment, I found Brad in the study, jacket off, sleeves rolled, phone pressed between shoulder and ear, while he scrolled through a spreadsheet on his laptop. He looked up when I entered and said quickly into the phone, "I'll call you back. Not Mom, not Gregory, just that fast." Clipped exit. People use when the wrong witness appears. "You're home early," he said. "I live here," I replied. He accepted that without argument, which was new. "How was your day?" Clarifying. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm starting to understand that nobody in your family ever answers the first question. They're asked." That earned me a long silence. Then he stood and came around the desk. "What do you want to ask me?" "Fine." I gave him the clean version. "What happened with Chloe Bennett?" His entire body changed. "Not much." A freeze, a small withdrawal in the shoulders. "Where did you hear that name?" "That is not an answer." He looked past me toward the hall. Then back at me. "It was years ago." Again, not an answer. He rubbed one hand over his mouth. "She and I were together." It ended, "There's nothing relevant there." That sounds edited. Because it's private. I stepped farther into the room. "You had cameras installed? In the apartment where I sleep? Your mother tried to assign me an obstetrician. I signed a marital agreement that reads like an acquisition document. You lost the privilege of using the word private on me." He stared at me. Something like anger surfacing now, through the polish. "You've been talking to people." "Yes." "Who?" "No." His jaw tightened. I went on, "Did she get pregnant?" That did it. Not because he answered, because he didn't. The room got very quiet. Then he said, "You need to stop asking about this." "Need?" "Not please." "Why?" "Because it has nothing to do with you." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Every time a man says that, he means it has everything to do with me. He came closer, voice lower. "Now, Emma." "No." "Tell me what happened." He looked exhausted, suddenly. "It got complicated." "With your mother?" A pause. Then, very softly, "Yes." There it was. Small, partial, real. I felt the blood pound in my ears. "How complicated?" He looked at the floor, then at me. "She didn't think Chloe was right for the family. Because she was impulsive. That's a personality trait. Try again. She wasn't built for the world around us." There are moments when contempt becomes so clean, it almost feels like calm. I nodded slowly. "And I am?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "That's not what I said." "No. It's what your whole life has been saying since I got married." He reached for me then. Maybe from habit. Maybe from guilt. I stepped back before he could touch my arm. "Did Chloe get pregnant?" I asked again. He shut his eyes, and that, too, was answer enough. I left the study before he could reorganize his face into something less honest. At 1:13 a, M. I woke to the sound of his phone vibrating in the next room, not ringing, buzzing once, twice, again, then floorboards. The guest room door was open an inch. Through the crack, I saw light in the hall and Brad moving toward the living room, phone to his ear, voice low. I got out of bed silently and moved just close enough to hear, "I know." "A pause?" "No." She asked directly. Another pause. I didn't confirm anything. His voice sharpened, then dropped again. "Because if we push too hard, shall bolt." I stopped breathing. He turned slightly, and I flattened myself against the wall. Then I heard the part that finished the sentence. "No." "Mom, I understand what's at stake." "Mom?" Of course, another silence. Then, tired and flat, I said I'll handle it. The call ended. I stood there, in the dark, while he remained in the living room for another full minute. One hand braced on the back of a dining chair, like the apartment itself had suddenly gotten heavier. When he finally went back to our bedroom, I stayed awake until dawn. Because once you hear your husband tell his mother not to push too hard, because you might bolt, the story rearranges itself. He was not simply caught between us. He was calibrating me. The next morning, I called Evelyn Shaw. Her office was in the loop, all sharp angles and impossible views. She read the prenup, the addendum, and my notes from memory of the phone call with Brad and Catherine. Then she looked up and said, "You are in more trouble than you think." I was afraid. You might say that you should have been afraid sooner. There was no cruelty in it, just precision. Walk me through the real problem. I said, "The real problem." She said, "Is not the rent or even the surveillance. The real problem is that this family appears to believe marriage gives them administrative rights over your behavior." I let that sink in. Then she went on, "The second problem is pregnancy. Pregnancy changes leverage. It changes urgency. It changes the stories people tell about women who resist." My throat tightened. And the third problem? She steepled her fingers. "You still want to believe your husband is fundamentally separate from the structure that raised him." I looked out the window. That obvious? To every woman, except the one married to him. She tapped the prenup with one finger. "This document is coercive, but not unbeatable. What worries me more is the addendum language. Medical advisors, timing of announcements, residents' decisions. It means they have already imagined pregnancy as something subject to governance. Governance? That word landed in my stomach, like iron. What do? You gather proof. Quietly. You stop telling your husband what you know. You stop assuming the next danger will announce itself in a document, and you find out what happened to Chloe Bennett. I stared at her. You think it matters that much? I think systems repeat themselves. Evelyn said, and if Catherine Thompson has done this before, then your marriage is not an anomaly. It's a pattern. By the time I left her office, I no longer felt confused. Fear had gotten cleaner than that. Outside, the wind off the river cut through my coat. For the first time in weeks, I did not go back to work right away. I went to Lincoln Park instead. To my apartment, my actual apartment, my brick walls, my hardwood floors, my tiny balcony with dead herbs and a rusting chair I had been meaning to replace for 2 years. The tenant was still there. Of course. I didn't have access. I just stood across the street with my hands in my pockets and looked up at the windows like a woman staring at an earlier version of herself through glass. Back when ownership meant freedom, back when marriage still felt like addition, not substitution, my phone buzzed. A text from Brad. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. A second text. "Mom wants us at dinner Sunday. Please just keep things calm until then." I looked at those words and felt something inside me turn from fear into clarity. Keep things calm. That was the operating principle. Wasn't it? Not make things right. Not tell the truth. Not choose me over her. Keep the image intact. Keep the wife from bolting. Keep the pressure invisible. By then, I understood the thing. I had been slowest to name. This family did not simply protect its own. It curated people. Suitable people were polished, positioned, and absorbable. Unsuitable people were edited, relocated, or pressured into silence. Pregnancy was not intimate news. It was an event with legal, social, and strategic consequences. And Brad, that was the part that hurt most. Brad was not merely a son, trapped under a powerful mother. That story was too kind. He was a man who had learned to translate violence into elegance so fluently. He could still call it love while helping enforce it. When I finally walked away from Lincoln Park that afternoon, I knew 2 things with total certainty. First, whatever had happened to Chloe Bennett was not over. It was buried. Second, if I did not understand it soon, my child would become, in the next chapter, written in the same house style. The story was no longer about fitting into the Thompsons. It was about getting out of their narrative before they finished writing me into it. I didn't tell Brad I had met Evelyn. I didn't tell him I had stood across the street from my old apartment and understood with humiliating clarity that the safest place in my life was the one I had almost let marriage erase. I didn't tell him I had stopped thinking in terms of fixing us and started thinking in terms of extraction. Instead, I went home, put down my bag, and let him kiss my cheek in the kitchen, like we were still a couple going through a difficult adjustment instead of 2 people standing on opposite sides of an invisible legal event. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. That was my first real lie inside the marriage. Not the first lie I'd told, but the first one designed to protect me from him. By Sunday, Catherine had arranged dinner at the apartment again. Power likes home court. She arrived with Bradley Sr. and a bottle of wine. Nobody opened. Gregory came 15 minutes later. just to drop something off, which told me exactly how the evening was supposed to go. Brad saw it too. That was the strange thing about the final stage of a bad situation. Everybody stops pretending at the same speed. We all knew why we were there. Catherine waited until we were seated in the living room. Then she produced a folder, not even an attempt at softness this time. Given the pregnancy, she said, Gregory has prepared a practical clarification. Posnup. There it was. The next tightening, I didn't reach for the folder. Gregory placed it on the coffee table anyway. This is standard. Under the circumstances, he said. I looked at him. Interesting how often people say standard right before asking a woman to sign away one more room in her life. Nobody smiled. Brad sat rigid in the chair beside mine, both hands locked together so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. Catherine ignored me and continued, it addresses medical coordination, temporary leave from employment, residential stability, and communication boundaries. During the pregnancy, communication boundaries, I almost laughed. You mean who I'm allowed to speak to? No, she said smoothly. We mean people whose interests may not align with the family. I repeated. Still singular. I see. Bradley Sr. finally spoke, low and tired. Emma, everyone is trying to reduce chaos. No. I said, you're trying to reduce witness. That landed. Gregory opened the folder and slid the first page toward me. I glanced down once, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Mandatory medical oversight with an approved provider, temporary suspension of employment during pregnancy, relocation, flexibility, as needed for maternal wellness, consultation requirements, for media, legal, and family communications, post-birth custodial planning, in private arbitration, not a marriage document, a containment plan. I looked up at Brad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the moment I stopped feeling torn. Not because the document surprised me, because he was still letting it happen. Say something. I said. He swallowed. Emma. No. Not to me. To them. Catherine sat perfectly still. Brad looked from me to his mother, and then back again. I think, he said carefully, some of this may be too aggressive. Might be too aggressive. The restraint of it was almost elegant. Catherine didn't even blink. This is already a compromise. Relative to what? I asked. Indentured servitude? Emma. Brad said sharply. But I was done. Being corrected for tone. I stood up. No, we're not doing this. Like I'm the unstable variable. In a room full of reasonable adults, Catherine rose more slowly. Still composed. Sit down. No. Her voice changed then. Not louder. Colder. You are carrying a Thompson child. I felt something in me lock. Not fear. Decision. No. I said quietly. I'm carrying my child. That is the first thing in this room. You do not get to rename. The silence after that was absolute. Gregory shifted first. Bradley Sr. looked away. Brad looked like I had hit him. Catherine's face emptied out completely. You are being emotional. I shook my head. I'm being final. Then I picked up the folder, closed it, and handed it back to Gregory. I'm not signing anything else. Not now. Not later. Not with your doctor. Not with your private arbitration. Not with your family language wrapped around my body. Brad stood up fast. Can we talk alone? No. Emma. Please. No. His face changed. Then, less husband, more pressure. Don't do this. In front of everyone. That was when I understood he still thought privacy would save him, that if he could just get me into another room, lower the temperature, restore the emotional tone, he could manage me back below the exit threshold. He had once discussed, with his mother in the dark. I grabbed my coat. Catherine's voice followed me. If you walk out right now, you are making an irreversible mistake. I turned back at the doorway. No, I said. I think I made that a few weeks ago. This is just the first smart thing I've done since I left before anyone could reorganize. The moment outside, the air was knife cold and clean. I got into the first cab I saw and went straight to Mia's apartment. She opened the door in leggings. No makeup. Legal pad in hand, like she had been waiting in a state of organized rage. Well, she said, I'm done. She nodded once, not surprised, just ready. Good. Come in. Evelyn joined us an hour later. By midnight, the three of us had built the first real architecture of my escape. Temporary residence, medical records transfer, financial separation, preservation of evidence, formal notice, emergency filings if they escalated. I slept on Mia's couch, under a blanket that smelled like detergent and safety. And for the first time since the wedding, I slept all the way through the night. Brad called 19 times. The next day, I answered on the 20th. Where are you? With my sister. He exhaled hard enough for me to hear it through the line. Thank God. That would have meant more if I hadn't already learned how flexible his fear could be. You left? Yes. You disappeared? No. I relocated. Very different legal category. He was quiet for a second. Then, my mother is furious. I almost smiled. I'll try to survive the news. Emma. Stop. Please. His voice cracked slightly. Can we talk like actual people? We had that option. Brad. It was available before the cameras. Another silence. Then he said the first truly honest thing I had heard from him in days. I don't know how to do this. Against her. That hurt more than if he'd shouted. Because I believed him, and because it was useless now, I know. I said, that's why I had to leave. He started crying then, not dramatically, just the quiet, stunned crying of a man realizing love had finally lost to structure. I do love you, he said. I know, I answered. And I did. That was the tragedy. Love had been present. It had just never been in charge. The next 2 weeks were ugly in the administrative way that ends marriages before judges ever see them. Letters, threats, counter letters. Concern disguised as legal language, Catherine pushed first, through counsel. Claims that I was unstable, claims that stress had made me unreliable, claims that isolation from the family during pregnancy was medically unwise, claims that long-standing support structures should be preserved. Evelyn responded by attaching evidence, photos of the surveillance devices, the prenatal addendum language, copies of the proposed postnup, a sworn statement from me, a statement from Mia about the timeline and document review. Then, at Evelyn's suggestion, I added one more detail. The late-night phone call, "If we push too hard, shall bolt." That sentence did more damage than almost anything else, because it turned their preferred narrative inside out. I was not the irrational wife creating conflict. I was the person whose flight risk had already been privately modeled by the family now claiming concern for my stability. A week later, Judge Alvarez granted me temporary residence rights in my Lincoln Park apartment. The second the tenant's transition agreement was finalized, along with restrictions on direct contact from Catherine, pending further review. When Evelyn called to tell me, I sat on Mia's fire escape in the late afternoon sun and cried so hard I scared the neighbor's cat. Not because I had won, because for the first time, the law had spoken to me in a language that was not theirs. Not family interest, not optics, not alignment, just rights. Brad asked to meet after that. Public place, daylight. No surprises. We met in a quiet corner of the Art Institute because apparently both of us were sentimental enough to choose a museum for the partial burial of our marriage. He looked thinner, less polished, like someone had finally started subtracting the machinery around him and discovered he had very little natural insulation underneath. "I'm in therapy," he said, before I even sat down. "That's good." He nodded. "I'm not saying it to get you back. No, I'm saying it because I think I'm only now realizing I've spent my whole life calling fear a responsibility. That was better than I expected. It was also late." He looked at my stomach then, not obvious yet, but no longer theoretical, and his face changed. "Not strategy, grief. I wanted to be different with you," he said. "I think you did," I replied. His eyes lifted to mine. "That sounds like forgiveness?" "It isn't. It's accuracy." He looked down at his hands. Then, after a long silence, he said, "There's something else." And for one terrible second, I thought, of course there is. But what came next was not another legal document. It was a name. "Clue?" he said. "I found out where she is." I said nothing. "She left because my mother made staying impossible. Not in some cinematic way. No dramatic blackmail. Just 1,000 forms of elegant suffocation. She got pregnant. Mom said it was the wrong moment. The wrong woman. The wrong story. For the family. I didn't stop it." His voice broke. On the last sentence, "What happened to the baby?" I asked, He shut his eyes. I don't know everything. That's the truth. I know there was money, lawyers, Switzerland, private medical care. I know my mother said it had been handled. I let that sentence stand because I wanted my life back. There it was. Not monstrousness, not innocence, cowardice, with a custom suit, and excellent manners. I felt sick with understanding because the final reframe of Brad was not that he was secretly a villain, it was worse. In a quieter way, he was a man who could live beside horror as long as someone translated it into administrative language quickly enough. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you were right. This family manages people, and I've been one of them. He looked up at me then, fully wrecked, fully real. I don't want our child managed. That was the first time he said, our child, in a way that sounded human. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I said, that starts with access. Not to me. To the truth. He nodded once. 2 days later, through counsel, he withdrew support. For every pressure point Catherine had tried to create around the pregnancy. No approved family doctor. No employment restriction request. No post-nup enforcement. No private arbitration motion. He did not become brave all at once. But he did something harder for men like him. He stopped cooperating. That was enough to begin breaking the machine. The rest unfolded the way real collapses often do, less like thunder, more like wiring, catching fire inside walls. The environmental suit worsened. Press attention widened, old stories resurfaced. Board members panicked. Catherine, stripped of automatic compliance, became sloppier. Angrier, less elegant. For a woman like her, exposure was not the loss of privacy. It was the loss of controlled narrative. By the time I moved back into my apartment, legally and actually, the herb boxes on the balcony were dead, and the place smelled faintly of fresh paint and old dust. It was perfect. Small, uneven, mine. I stood in the living room that first night with one hand on the exposed brick and one on my stomach, and listened. No hallway motion sensor I hadn't approved. No polished silence. No family art. No inherited furniture waiting for me to behave correctly around it. Just pipes. Street noise. A neighbor's TV through one wall. My own breathing. Peace. I discovered was not always beautiful. Sometimes it was cheap flooring, weak overhead lighting, and the radical absence of someone else's permission. The divorce took months after that. But the marriage ended there. Not in court. Not in the letters. Not in the museum. In that apartment, with the windows cracked to let in spring air, with my body no longer under committee review, with my name back in the mailbox. Brad came once near the end to drop off a box of things he thought I might want. Books, a sweater, a framed photo from before the wedding when we were still, just 2 people in bad weather, outside a diner, laughing at nothing. I kept the books, not the photo. At the door, he stood awkwardly, both hands in his coat pockets. I'm sorry, he said. I know. It wasn't a full answer, but it was the true one. He nodded, looked past me into the apartment like he was trying to understand the scale of what had been lost, then said, I hope she gets your stubbornness. She already has my timing. I said, that made him smile through the sadness. Then he left. Months later, when my daughter was born, Mia was in the room. My mother was crying. And the first thing I felt when they put that tiny warm weight on my chest was not triumph. It was relief. Profound, quiet, body deep relief. She was here. She was safe. She was not an asset, not a legacy instrument, not a family event, not an heir under review. Just a baby. My baby. I named her Grace, not because the name sounded elegant, because I had spent a year living without any and wanted to put some back into the world myself. Brad met her 2 days later. He held her carefully, like someone holding both proof and punishment. She's beautiful, he whispered. Yes, I said. He gave her back without argument. That mattered more than it should have. After he left, I sat by the hospital window with Grace asleep against me and looked out over the city that had nearly swallowed me whole beneath the language of prestige. Chicago looked the way it always did. Hard-edged, expensive in places, ordinary in others. I thought about the lease. It had seemed so small at first. Petty. Even an insult with paperwork. But that was the trick. Control rarely opens. By declaring itself, it starts with tone, with paperwork, with one room that isn't yours, with one signature, with one person you love asking you to keep things calm. Then one day, you look up and realize your body, your work, your home, your future, even your child, are all being discussed in the same language. A week after I brought Grace home, the final decree arrived by email. I opened it at my kitchen table in the apartment I had once almost given up. Outside, the balcony planters were green again. I had started over with basil and rosemary and one stubborn tomato plant that looked like it might survive out of spite alone. I signed the decree while my daughter slept in the next room. No candles, no witnesses, no family language, wrapped around the moment. Just a pen, a table, a quiet life, returning to itself. That night, after her feeding, I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her sleep. The apartment was small. The future was not fully solved. The legal scars would outlast the paperwork. Brad would always be tied to us, in some way. Catherine would probably die furious. But the silence in that home no longer felt like suppression. It felt like safety, and that I had finally learned was the difference between a beautiful prison and an ordinary life. Only one of them lets you keep your name